A new front has officially opened in the protracted technology Cold War between the United States and China. On September 13, 2025, MOFCOM announced a formal anti-dumping investigation into specific analog integrated circuit chips imported from the United States. This move signals a significant escalation, shifting the focus from high-end semiconductors to legacy analog chips. The probe began after a formal complaint from Chinese industry bodies alleging American firms sold components in China at prices far below fair market value, a practice that harmed domestic producers by suppressing local prices and eroding market share. MOFCOM's Trade Remedy and Investigation Bureau is conducting the investigation. The Bureau protects domestic industries from unfair foreign trade practices. Immediately after the announcement, the Bureau distributed detailed questionnaires to exporters, aiming to gather evidence to substantiate or dismiss the dumping allegations. The probe is not just procedural, it's a strategic signal from Beijing that it will use regulatory and legal tools. But industry analysis points to major analog players: Texas Instruments, Analog Devices Incorporated, Broadcom, ON Semiconductor. These firms have large operations in China and supply the analog chips under review. The allegation centers on predatory pricing to maintain market dominance in China. Chinese officials say this created an unlevel playing field for Chinese analog chip makers. By allegedly selling chips at artificially low prices, U.S. firms are accused of suppressing domestic prices and stifling China's indigenous industry. This investigation challenges U.S. market strategies and could spark a prolonged, costly trade dispute over fundamental electronic components. The focus of China's anti-dumping probe is not on the cutting-edge, high-performance processors that often dominate headlines. Instead, the probe targets legacy analog integrated circuits, specifically 40 nanometers or larger. They may lack glamour, but these analog ICs are the workhorses of electronics, linking processors to the real world: light, sound, temperature, pressure. These products are crucial across industrial, automotive, consumer electronics. MOFCOM's list includes interface ICs, gate driver ICs. Among them, RS-485 transceivers, CAN transceivers standard for industrial and vehicle networks. Also, digital isolators, safety, transfer signals without direct electrical connection. I2C expanders, increase microcontroller I/O. Gate driver chips are key in power electronics, driving power transistors in voltage regulator modules. Rationale is multifaceted. First, they're high-volume, commodity-like products where price is a major competitive factor. That makes them vulnerable to dumping, where a dominant player uses scale to undercut rivals. Second, despite mature tech, they're critically important. China has vast manufacturing from electric vehicles to factory automation, all relying on steady supplies of these analog parts. Beijing's goal: build self-sufficient domestic supply chains and protect local producers from unfair competition. MOFCOM says low-priced U.S. imports caused material injury. The claim, artificial low prices stole market share, forced Chinese firms to cut prices, squeezed margins, and limited R&D and expansion. By launching the probe, China says it will defend and cultivate a robust domestic semiconductor ecosystem, even in the less glamorous market for mature node analog chips. It is a marathon, not a sprint, designed to be thorough and legally defensible. According to the official announcement, the investigation formally began on September 13, 2025, and is scheduled to last for at least 1 year. This means that the earliest a final determination could be reached is September 13, 2026. This extended time frame allows the investigating authority ample opportunity to collect and analyze the vast amounts of data requested from U.S. companies, conduct hearings, verify the information submitted by all parties, including the domestic Chinese industry that filed the initial complaint. However, the timeline comes with built-in flexibility that could prolong the period of uncertainty for the involved companies. The regulations governing these trade remedy cases in China allow for an extension of the investigation if the case proves to be particularly complex. MOFCOM has the authority to extend the deadline by an additional 6 months. This means the investigation could potentially stretch all the way to March 13, 2027. This long duration creates a sustained period of risk and ambiguity for companies like Texas Instruments and Analogue devices, as their sales, pricing strategies, and customer relationships in China will remain under a cloud of regulatory scrutiny for up to 2 years. The process is interactive and can have immediate consequences. MOFCOM has the power to impose provisional anti-dumping duties at an interim stage of the investigation, typically several months after it begins. If the preliminary findings suggest that dumping is occurring and causing injury to the domestic industry, the Bureau can implement temporary tariffs on the imported chips. These provisional measures would immediately raise the cost of US-made analog ICs for Chinese buyers, potentially causing a rapid shift in purchasing decisions long before the final determination is made. The extended timeline also serves a strategic purpose for China. It keeps the pressure on US companies and the US government for a prolonged period, creating a persistent bargaining chip that can be used in broader trade negotiations. Section 5. The numbers game. Import volumes, price drops, dumping margins. The foundation of China's anti-dumping case rests on a set of compelling statistics presented by the petitioners and cited by MOFCOM in its official announcement. These figures paint a stark picture of market dynamics. The data covers the period from 2022 to 2024, a time frame during which the market for these legacy analog ICs underwent significant changes. The ministry's statement highlighted a dramatic increase in the volume of the targeted chips being imported from the United States. Specifically, the import volume of these mature node ICs reportedly surged by an astonishing 37% over this 2-year period. Dual-axis chart showing import volume rising by 37% and import price falling by 52%, 2022-2024. In stark contrast to the rising import volumes, the prices of these same chips were moving in the opposite direction. According to the data released by the Ministry of Commerce, the average import price for the subject semiconductors plummeted by 52% between 2022 and 2024. This combination of surging volumes and collapsing prices is the classic hallmark of a potential dumping scenario. From the perspective of the Chinese petitioners, this trend demonstrates that US companies were aggressively pushing more product into the market at ever lower prices, a strategy that domestic firms could not sustainably match. This price pressure, they argue, has directly lowered and suppressed the sales prices of domestic products. Perhaps the most dramatic figure cited in the case filings is the estimated dumping margin. A dumping margin is the calculated difference between a product's price in its home market or its cost of production and its lower price in the export market. Submissions made to MOFCOM by the Chinese Industry Association alleged that for some of the products under investigation, the dumping margins on exports from the United States to China were astronomical, exceeding 300%. This implies that some chips were allegedly being sold in China for less than a quarter of their fair value. While this figure represents the petitioner's claim and has yet to be verified by MOFCOM, it is a powerful and provocative number that sets a contentious tone for the investigation. Section 6. Practical impacts. The immediate risks for US chipmakers. For the American semiconductor firms caught in the middle of this probe, the practical impacts are immediate, tangible, and multifaceted. The most direct and significant risk is the potential for a substantial loss of sales in the Chinese market, which remains one of the largest consumers of electronic components in the world. If MOFCOM imposes provisional anti-dumping tariffs, if MOFCOM imposes final anti-dumping tariffs, the cost of importing chips from companies like Texas Instruments analog devices will increase dramatically for Chinese customers. This would make their products less competitive against domestic alternatives, likely prompting buyers to switch to local suppliers like 3Peak SGM Micro, who would receive a significant boost. Beyond the threat of tariffs, the investigation itself creates a major compliance and data security headache. At the heart of the investigation is a comprehensive and notably intrusive questionnaire dispatched by China's Trade Remedy and Investigation Bureau. This document is not a simple request for information. It is a detailed demand for highly sensitive commercial data that cuts to the core of how US semiconductor companies operate within the Chinese market. The questionnaire is designed to uncover pricing discrepancies between what companies charge in their domestic market and their export market in China. That comparison provides the foundational evidence required for an anti-dumping case. The level of detail requested has raised significant concerns among American firms about data security, customer privacy, and competitive disadvantage. The questionnaire explicitly asks for a complete list of the names of all Chinese customers dealt with during the investigation period. This goes far beyond aggregated sales figures, demanding a granular breakdown of client relationships. The Bureau also requires extensive transaction details for each sale. This includes precise sales volumes of the targeted chips, exact prices charged in each transaction, and the terms of the sales contracts. Such information is highly confidential. It reveals pricing strategies and customer-specific discounts central to competitive edge. The data demands also dig into operational and logistical aspects of the business. Companies must provide a full accounting of costs associated with selling into China. That includes freight and shipping expenses to move products from the United States to China. It also asks for warehouse storage details and local transport costs within China, mapping the supply chain from factory door to customer facility. MOFCOM will use those cost figures to calculate a constructed value for the chips, then compare that to export prices to determine any dumping margin. The questionnaire gives companies a tight window of just 37 days to gather, compile, and submit this complex data. For large multinationals with intricate sales networks and accounting systems, that is a formidable task. No companies were named in the initial announcement, creating ambiguity, but major exporters of the specified chips are expected to respond. Failure to comply or providing incomplete data could prompt MOFCOM to use the best information available, often the petitioner's data, likely a worse outcome for U.S. firms. The size of the dumping margin is a key factor in determining the level of anti-dumping duties that can be imposed. Section 7. The broader context. A new front in the U.S.-China tech war. This anti-dumping investigation into analog chips cannot be viewed in isolation. It is the latest move in a much larger and more complex geopolitical chess match, the ongoing U.S.-China technology war. For years, the primary battleground has been the realm of advanced technology. The United States has implemented a series of stringent export curbs aimed at preventing China from acquiring the high-end semiconductors, sophisticated chip-making equipment necessary for advanced applications like artificial intelligence supercomputing. These controls, significantly tightened by the Biden administration, have had a measurable impact, with U.S. semiconductor exports to China falling by approximately 27% between 2022 and 2024. China has not stood idly by. In a clear act of retaliation, Beijing has begun to leverage its own dominance in other critical areas of the technology supply chain. In 2023, China imposed export controls on two key raw materials, gallium germanium. These metals are not widely known to the public but are essential for manufacturing a range of high-tech products, including high-performance semiconductors, fiber optic cables, night vision equipment. The impact was immediate and global, with prices for gallium soaring by 36% and prices for germanium soaring by 42%, respectively, within weeks of the announcement. This move demonstrated China's willingness and ability to weaponize its control over critical resources in response to U.S. pressure. The Analogue chip probe represents a strategic pivot by China. Instead of retaliating in a completely different sector, Beijing is now hitting back within the semiconductor industry itself, but on a different flank. By targeting mature node, legacy chips, China is attacking a segment where U.S. companies are highly profitable and hold significant market share, but where China also has a growing domestic capability. This makes it a strategically sound target for a trade remedy case. It allows China to protect and nurture its own burgeoning chip makers while simultaneously inflicting economic pain on major American corporations. Section 8. Strategic ripples. Supply chain, decoupling, and market shifts. Section 8. Strategic ripples, supply chain, decoupling, and market shifts. The long-term consequences of China's anti-dumping probe extend far beyond the immediate financial results of the targeted companies. This action is a powerful catalyst that will accelerate the ongoing trend of global technology supply chain decoupling. For years, the tech industry operated on a globalized model. Design, manufacturing, assembly, optimized for cost and efficiency across different countries. This investigation, along with the preceding U.S. export controls, sends a clear signal that this model is no longer tenable. Companies are now being forced to think in terms of parallel ecosystems, one aligned with the United States and its allies, and another centered around China. This strategic shift will compel multinational corporations to reevaluate and reconfigure their global operations. Companies that once relied on a single global supply chain will increasingly move toward a China plus one or even a China for China strategy. This means establishing separate, localized supply chains to serve the Chinese market. At the same time, they will build out redundant supply chains outside of China to serve the rest of the world. This bifurcation is costly and inefficient, but it is becoming a necessary cost of doing business in a politically fragmented world. The probe will also have a profound impact on market dynamics within China. By potentially raising the cost of US-made chips, the investigation creates a significant market opening for domestic Chinese semiconductor firms. Companies like 3Peak, SGM Micro, and others specializing in analog ICs are poised to benefit immensely. They will likely see increased demand from Chinese manufacturers eager to secure their supply chains and reduce their reliance on American components. This government-driven market protection could provide Chinese firms with the scale and revenue needed to accelerate their research and development, improve their product quality, and become more competitive not only within China, but eventually on the global stage. Furthermore, these trade actions will continue to ripple through the markets for raw materials and manufacturing equipment. As China doubles down on building a self-sufficient semiconductor industry, it will increase its investment in domestic silicon wafer production to developing its own lithography and etching equipment. Similarly, as Western countries seek to secure their own supply chains, we will see increased investment in mining and processing critical minerals outside of China. Gallium Germanium. Section 9. Navigating the Storm. Next steps for companies and observers. In the face of this complex and evolving situation, both affected companies and outside observers must adopt vigilant monitoring and strategic planning. For firms like Texas Instruments, Analogue Devices, and others in the line of fire, the immediate priority is a robust legal and procedural defense. Engage experienced trade lawyers in China. Gather sales and cost data demanded by MOFCOM. Prepare a comprehensive response within the time frame. Seek confidentiality protections for sensitive commercial data. Proactively manage business relationships. Communicate transparently with stakeholders. Inform investors about potential financial risks, as regulatory disclosures for material events are a legal requirement. Maintain an open dialogue with Chinese customers, provide clarity about potential price changes and address supply issues. Work to find solutions that maintain business continuity. Begin scenario planning for various outcomes, including the imposition of provisional duties, and accelerate any existing plans for supply chain diversification. For investors, analysts, and other stakeholders, watch for specific signposts. First, keep a close eye on corporate filings and quarterly earnings calls of the involved companies. Second, monitor announcements from MOFCOM for any news of preliminary findings or the imposition of provisional tariffs. Such a move would be the first concrete action to have direct market impact and would signal a hardening of China's position. Finally, place these events within the broader geopolitical context. Follow progress of US-China trade talks and leadership meetings as potential off-ramps for de-escalation.